Director of Episcopal Community Services, was able to join us and to fill in for Dr. Sarah Whitman. Nancy is the CEO of Liberté, and she will tell you a little bit about the organization and the work they do in this area. She has run drug and alcohol treatment centers and edited a book on pain management. And so I think she'll be a great resource for us today, along with Beth Thorpe, who will be our first speaker, who's a member of our congregation known to so many of you. Beth has lived for many years with chronic pain and will share a personal story about that, and then we'll turn it over to Nancy to give kind of a wider scope of how this is affecting our nation and how it has become such a great crisis across our country. Thank you for joining us today. We're thrilled to have both of you with us. Turn it over to you, Beth.
Good morning. Good morning. I'm not used to using a microphone, so I'm going to give this a shot. And I also can't stand still, as anybody who knows me knows. So I'm going to move around a little bit. Can you hear? Yes. My name again is Beth Thorpe. I've been a parishioner here at St. Thomas's for about 2 years. My chronic pain began about 20 years ago. So I think I want to start by defining chronic pain from a layperson standpoint. I'm not a doctor. This is what one of the things Sarah would have talked about. But acute pain would be if you break your leg, it hurts at first, it heals, and once the bone is healed and you're back to normal, the pain goes away, and then life goes on. With chronic pain, what happens is the pain just never goes away. So you have an injury or some event, and you start having pain, which in the beginning is acute, but it just doesn't leave even when the root cause is addressed. And I've read that chronic pain by the physicians is defined as pain that lasts more than 3 months. And mine's been around for almost 20 years. I started out with sciatica, which ran in my family, and it was mild. I was in PT, and then I sneezed, and it was like a gunshot going down my leg, and that led to a surgery and multiple surgeries, and here I am 20 years later. What I want to do is talk about today 4 things. My history with opiates. I am a living, breathing example of a chronic pain patient who has lived on opiates. I call them narcotics, whatever, you know what we mean. Vicodin, Percocet, Dilaudid, fentanyl, and now off of opiates. I successfully stopped taking them almost 2 years ago. Then I'd like to talk, secondly, about my coping plan, how I manage my pain without the use of opiates. Many of these things I did when I was taking the drugs, but they're even more important today. Third, there's some challenges of living with chronic pain. And I'd like to talk about just a few of the key challenges and then how I personally address those. And finally, how you, assuming that you're not also one of the many, many chronic pain patients, how you can help your friends and family members who have chronic pain. And this is my story, these are my thoughts. I'm not an expert in this sense that I have done research or been exposed to anything other than a handful of other chronic pain patients who I've met over the years. So early on, when I first sneezed and went through my early sciatica and other pain, I used the typical Western medical approaches, physical therapy, medications, not narcotics, but other Advil and that kind of stuff. And ultimately, I did go to surgery because I really was pretty crippled. I couldn't do anything. And I was able to sort of bounce back you know, it's not a linear progression. It's always sort of stepwise. For a number of years, then I also tried a bunch of non-Western, non-traditional approaches. Chiropractic, acupuncture, therapeutic massage, yoga, something called Feldenkrais, and all sorts of things that, you know, I can't even name anymore. My goal was to not take these heavy drugs. I really wanted to find a way to manage my pain and do it through alternative methods. I was an ice skater as a child and adult, and I wanted to stay as active as I could. But over time, none of these really gave me any kind of long-term relief. So with doctors completely agreeing and supporting me, I went down the opiate route. And I fought the introduction of long-acting meds. I was taking something like Vicodin and Percocet, and one doctor said to me he wanted me to take morphine. Well, morphine, God, it sounds so scary, right? But I ended up taking morphine, you know, so I've tried pretty much all of them. So over 10 to 12 years or so, I was taking these medications, a combination of the short-acting and the long-acting, and over that time period, rarely did my dose go down. Again, it wasn't completely linear, but for the most part, it was on an upward trend. Now, those who knew me during those years, I think would agree when I say I didn't walk around narcotized like a drug addict. I was taking the drugs for pain relief. So I wasn't chasing a high, I didn't get high. I was just looking for a way to have my pain managed. But because of the nature of these drugs, your body and brain get used to them and they stop being as effective unless you increase the dose. So I had to increase the doses. And by 2016, I was taking the equivalent of 240 milligrams of morphine milligrams, morphine equivalents, which is a lot. I also started developing headaches, and my pain wasn't under control. And so I said to my doctor that I really wanted to go off of these. And his first reaction was, well, why? There's no real indication other than these headaches that it's warranted. And I said, well, because I want to see what my pain is like, if I'm, like what my baseline is. And I thought maybe I could go off them, reset, and I, if necessary, would go back on them, but instead of having to take 20 milligrams, maybe 5 or 4. And the doctor said, well, your pain is bad. It's really, really bad. Can you imagine a doctor saying that to you? But ultimately, he agreed that he would support me and that it was probably a good idea. By 2016, you know, I think the medical community was becoming more aware of how it wasn't so good that we were getting on such high doses, and I was in a state they called hyperalgesia, which means they believed that my pain was worse from the narcotics, not better. So I started off on my own at home under the doctor's care, of course, and I got my dose down to 2/3. I got down to about 90 milligrams a day. And I then went into an inpatient program that was designed for pain patients at Johns Hopkins. They had other programs for addicts, but we were a special group. We all had pain, and we were all coming off of opioids and some people benzodiazepines, which is like Valium or Ativan, those kinds of things. And between March and May of 2016, I took my last narcotic pill on May 18th or something like that, 2016. And surprisingly, in the beginning, I was actually better. My pain was better. And I certainly felt, other than going through withdrawal symptoms, which are pretty not fun, My pain has bounced back, and I'll talk in a minute a little more about what it's like, but I know I'm better for being off them. I'm physically stronger, I'm less emotional, I'm more clear-headed, I have more energy. So there are definitely times when I'd love to pop one of those little pills, but I know that it was the right thing to do for me. And I'm not suggesting that I want to generalize this to everybody, because I know that these medications have a good use in certain circumstances. I also think that we need to be, and I think the industry is, researching and testing non-addictive pain meds for those with long-term need. And also, insurance companies, I think, should pay for some of the non-traditional treatments that we as pain patients rely on when we don't take these kinds of medications. Is there anything you want to add to that bit? Sure. All right. So now I want to just talk a little bit about, so I'm not taking these powerful drugs. How do I cope? What do I do to help relieve my pain? I think one of the most important things for me is exercise. And for me, because I have back issues, it has to be low impact, but I do walking, I can do a treadmill, an elliptical, I swim, but just keeping moving is really helpful. If I'm in too much pain to do real exercise, even just moving from one place to another, going, to visit somebody, just moving around, changing the scenery is really helpful. Distraction is an enormous, that's probably my #1 pain relief. If you can get your mind off the pain, it really does retreat to the back of your mind. I've heard some people say, oh, I'm making my pain my friend. I'm like, if I'm going to make my pain my friend, that means I have to pay attention to it. Like, I don't really want to do that. So reading a book, watching a TV show, anything that, for me, knitting, anything that is fun for you would be something that would help take you away from the pain, remove you from the reality of it for a little while. Support groups, I also can't speak more highly of. Both formal support groups, because it's so helpful to know that there are other people who are in your same boat. They get it. They live it with you just like you do, and you don't feel alone, which for a long time I didn't understand that there were other people, or that I had like a condition, chronic pain. Even if you don't go to a formal support group, I can call up a friend of mine if I'm having a lousy day, or shoot her an email and exchange stories. And it's just always helpful to hear words of encouragement and support, and I get it, don't give up, that kind of stuff. So working with others who are the same is critical. And I need to also be realistic about my capabilities. I can't overdo. The things I've mentioned are helpful, but I still want to live a normal life. And a lot of the times, I probably look completely normal to you all right now, and you're thinking, can't believe she's in pain. I have to really watch my activities. I try and limit myself to 2 or 3 things a day. Maybe I'll go to a class and then go out to dinner with my husband, or go out to lunch with a friend and, go to a class in the afternoon, whatever, you get it. But if I try and do too many things, I'm going to end up paying for it. So chronic pain is also really variable. And I'm not in pain every minute of every day, but I am in pain every day. So that is one of the real challenges with chronic pain. People don't get it. Because I look well most of the time, and somebody saw me going to the gym in the morning, they think, oh, she's fine, there's nothing wrong with her. And then I might be going into dinner with a little cane chair I have, or even my wheelchair. And it's important, it's helpful, I guess, to me as a patient, to have people understand that I'm not making this up. It's not that I want to go to the gym in the morning, so I do that, and then I don't want to go to dinner, so I look like I'm in pain. I mean, it's, you know, it's variable. The desire to be normal is really strong, as I said a minute ago, and so it's really important to weigh how important an activity is. If there's something I really, really want to do, maybe it's worth it to go out on the boat with the grandkids so that I can spend a lot of time with them, knowing that my back is going to be really sore that night or the next day. But it was worth it. I got a great experience out of it. Something less fun, I might say, it's not worth it and I have to pass. Accepting help, I mean, we all have talked about this in many other circumstances, but it's very important. We hate to do it, but if we need to get something done and we know we can't do it ourselves, generally I've found my friends and family are willing to do what they can. They're there for me, but it's often very difficult to ask. Depression or mood changes anyway obviously go along with this, and it's a struggle to be happy all the time. I can't allow myself to look in the future and say, gee, I'm going to be in pain for the rest of my life. I mean, I hope that's not true, but that is a possibility. I have to take it sort of the one day at a time and try and find ways to keep myself up. And I think that a lot of the other things I've mentioned help me to do that. Unfortunately, one of the challenges of pain is the poor loved ones and taking it out on them. I feel so sorry for all the spouses and mates and whatever of chronic pain patients, because we just can't be happy all the time. And unfortunately, when we feel bad or in pain, we're going to take it out on others. I don't really have a good solution for that, although I'm aware of it, and I hope that I don't do it too often. The last thing I want to talk about, hopefully I'm not taking too much time, is how you can help others who are in pain. If you know someone, if you have a family member, a friend, one suggestion I would have is that you don't play doctor. I can't tell you how many times people have come up to me and said, oh, you have to try this new treatment, drug, process, whatever it is. I know that you're trying to be helpful, and that aspect of it is very appreciative, but trust me, I have tried everything. And most of us in this situation have at least one, if not a team, of physicians and paraprofessionals who are giving us all the care and latest technologies and treatments that are available. So being supportive, great, but trying to tell us what to do isn't really all that helpful. Be flexible would be my second suggestion. Again, chronic pain is variable. Just because I'm looking okay right now doesn't mean that in an hour or 5 hours or tomorrow I'm going to be in bad shape. You saw me this morning, we've got plans for dinner, great, yay, and then I call you up at 4:30 in the afternoon and say, I'm sorry, I can't do it, my pain's too bad. I'm not making it up, Understand that it just goes up and down and there's no way of predicting what's going to happen. So be prepared for alternate plans, and that would be really helpful. Finally, offer help. If you're going out on errands, you know somebody who has trouble getting out, call them up and say, hey, I'm going to the Acme, do you need anything? Or, you know, I'm wrapping my Christmas presents this week, and was wondering if you need help wrapping yours. I have a friend, she's someone who's a member of this parish, who one year when I was pretty bedridden, basically, spent 2 or 3 days at my house and wrapped every single Christmas present that Ramsey and I gave to our family. So that kind of thing is just so helpful. So chronic pain is a disease requiring management that can really feel like a full-time job. Every day is different. We have lots of different ways of managing it. I've named a lot of them. Meditation is one that I haven't mentioned, but I actually use a lot. But every day is different, so we use different tools every day. You can be helpful by being understanding and supportive of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. That's so brave to acknowledge this issue and to provide this kind of a forum to discuss this. And thank you for inviting me as the stand-in, the cheap substitute. I'm not a physician. I don't have any medical background. I'm an administrator, so my perspective is slightly different. But to tell you a little bit about myself, I've been working in the substance abuse field since the 1970s. So this world really collides here, and it's a very curious kind of perfect storm, because it has, because of the opiate crisis and this issue of chronic pain and the prescription drug issue, it has set the addiction world on its head. And in some very, very interesting ways, it's had a lot of implications about the way we have looked at substance abuse over the years, and it has some profound effects on the way we've been delivering treatment and the way we will do so going forward. And so that matters a lot to me. And to just tell you a little bit about myself, I'm not a recovering person. However, as most people would naturally get into this field, I had an inclination that there were a lot of people in my life that were struggling with this issue. Growing up, one of them being my grandmother, and then my brother became an addict, and that had a profound effect on my life. And then as my life went on, I had some partners with that same issue, and now I have a 22-year-old son who is a heroin addict, and thankfully for now he's in recovery and doing okay, which I'm extremely grateful for. So I'm the CEO of Liberté, which is in Bensalem, Pennsylvania, and it is a residential and outpatient facility for women, and we have 58 beds for women in recovery, and some of those are dedicated to women who are able to bring their children into treatment with them. So we provide a lot of support services for families, and we just opened a newly licensed outpatient facility. We do have a medical director, a psychiatrist on our staff, so we're providing a lot of adjunct psychiatric services, and some of that includes some medication-assisted treatment, which I'll talk about a little bit. And one of the things that Beth said that just jumped right out at me was, the use of all of these adjuncts, yoga and meditation and mindfulness, because this is where, when I started out in the 70s, we had that idea that these practices, they were kind of hippie practices back then, and that they might be useful, that we were onto something. And then the field went into, the spiritual approach, of course, because the 12-step approaches are very, very important in this. I do absolutely adhere to the 12-step model in, both my personal life and in the treatment world. Some of those slogans have profound meaning for me. I would say, one of them being, "But for the grace of God, there go I." In my own family, that definitely applies. And having, lived through the 60s and having thought that I aspired to be a hippie, I tried every recreational drug, that there was a possibility to get my hands on. And so the question is, why not me? What was the difference between me and the other person right next to me that became an addict? And most recently, I had 2 major surgeries. So I'm the person who, if the doctor gave me a great big pile of opiates, I look at them and I say, ugh, I can't stand that effect. I don't like the feeling of it. And the minute I can get off of them, I don't do what you're supposed to do, so don't listen to this. But truth be told, I crush them up. I do this on purpose because of my son, mostly. I crush them up and I pour detergent, dish detergent on them, and then I, put them in the trash. And the minute I can stop taking them, usually within a day or 2, no matter what the surgery, and I'm talking major surgery, I can't stand that effect. So why me? And, again, my brother, the probably closest person, DNA-wise to me. So that's a baffling, situation to me. And again, when we look at all of the people today who are inadvertently becoming addicts, the next question I have is, so what's this deal about an addictive personality? I'm not so sure about that anymore, and I don't know that I ever was. So basically, when I say the worlds are colliding, what we have is the addiction world, where we have people who were basically, seeking a sensation. They were looking for a high. But going back to Beth's point, when she said, well, I wasn't doing that. And in fact, after a little while, I wasn't getting an effect from the opiates I was using. Well, the same thing occurs with people that are in addiction. They have that initial, euphoric effect from the drug, whatever it is that they're using. And we're talking about opiates, but it's the same with other types of drugs of abuse. So the person uses those, especially when they're the addicting type of opiates, but eventually, and not too soon thereafter, there's a tolerance that builds up, and then there's the withdrawal that occurs. And the next thing in that addiction is the person is simply looking to alleviate the effects of the withdrawal, period. There is no further euphoric effects that are gained from taking that opiate over time. So you're basically on a pattern of a daily use that's just to manage the withdrawal. So then you look at the brain chemistry and you say, what can we do to alleviate those withdrawal effects? Are there medications that we can employ? Because what we see now are more and more powerful opiates, not just the ones that are available by way of prescriptions that are being diverted onto the street, by overprescribing, by the doctors that are running pill mills in different locations where people know. Even in pain management clinics, you've probably heard in the news, in the headlines about clinics being shut down. And so you have people who are using these drugs and just simply can't get off of them without severe, withdrawal symptoms that are extremely uncomfortable. And when people tell you that it's akin to having the worst case of the flu, well, we already know what it's like to have the flu, and then, multiply that by a factor of 100, and you know that the only thing that's going to, make that better is if you got, some of the drug that you're stopping. So even for people that are going into detox centers, they go in for a few days and they walk out, and the first thing they do, without something that's helping them not go through those prolonged cravings, which are subacute, but they last for weeks and sometimes months at a time, they typically will go right back to use again. And what's so dangerous about that is now that there's no tolerance anymore. The drugs that are available on the street are so powerful and so dangerous that you're at a very, very high risk of having an overdose and an overdose death. So all of that being said, what we're doing at Liberté is we're targeting, first of all, pregnant intravenous drug users, opiate users. So that's our high priority. So in the past year, for the 50 beds that we have for women, we had 733 referrals for those beds. We had, in the past 9 years, there were 94 babies born to moms at Liberté. In this current year, we've had 14 babies born, and we have women who are pregnant right now. And the crisis is not abating. There's no end to this, and it's really very frightening to me because I wish I could stand here and tell you we have some, amazing breakthroughs on the horizon and some good news, and that we have, ways to treat this, but we in this field are just as stymied as, the lay people are. So that is not the case. What we do have are a lot of different approaches that we're, we're all, kind of banding together at this point, because we realize that, first of all, the drug addiction, treatment field is overwhelmed. And then you have this, the physicians who are dialing back on prescribing because of the frightening outcome of hopefully inadvertently addicting people to pain medications. And some of the things that are challenging about that is, so what do you do about pain? And a lot of the things that Beth said, I'm not going to repeat. I was going to say them, even the fancy word she used, hyperalgesia. So glad she already said that. Because that's one of the consequences of the use of opiates for chronic pain. It's just not proven that it's effective to use opiates for chronic pain management. Acute pain, yes. So again, back to me, it's not that I'm a perfect case, but short-term use for acute pain, sure. We have evidence of that, of course, being useful, but not for long-term use. And then she also very cogently stated that she had breakthrough pain. And she said, wow, I'm already, I'm in pain still, and I'm using these massive amounts of morphine. Well, what's that all about? So that is significantly troublesome when you're using the highest amounts of morphine you could possibly use, because right next to the most effective dose is the lethal dose. So you've got a problem there if you're using the highest dose you can use, because we know what opiates do. They reduce your respiration rate and your heart rate and all of that. So, and she said, well, I'm walking around and I'm kind of functional. Well, it's the same way with addicts. They're usually walking around and they're pretty functional, but with a lot of tolerance, how much more can you use? So those are some of the adverse consequences of using opiates in any event, whether it's for chronic pain or because you're in addiction. So some of the things that I wanted to point out that are, when I say our worlds are colliding, is that in the addiction world, when you're taking people into treatment, a lot of times you're taking people into treatment that do have pain issues. And going back to the pain issue, it's also very difficult to diagnose addiction in a person who is in pain, a person who's a pain patient, and who's using opioids. So there are tools to screen people in advance. So if your doctor is recommending to you or a loved one that your chronic pain is now at a point where maybe you want to consider being put on opioid treatment, there's some screening tools that you may want to mention to your doctor to say, let's just talk about the potential for me or my loved one becoming addicted to this. And if your doctor is, up on the latest and the greatest, he or she ought to be able to screen you for that, just that potential. And some of the other things to screen for are some of the comorbid conditions like PTSD, anxiety, and depression, because some of those things will play a part in whether or not you become addicted to opiates, just like they occur in addiction as well for the, you know, what can I say, the garden variety addict. So that's one of the problems, is that when a person is in pain treatment and they become addicted to opioids, it's kind of challenging to tease that out, whether they've become addicted or not. The other thing that is occurring in the addiction world is the prevalence of pain among opiate addicts. So, as Beth pointed out, there's that issue of hyperalgesia. In other words, people are experiencing, you know, more pain, and we know pain is subjective. We have rating scales and all of that, but I can go back to, you know, where I started out in the 1970s and tell you, working in a, you know, a TC, a therapeutic community, and you work overnight on the graveyard shift when you're young, you know, when you're just starting out, they put you on those midnight shifts. And I can just remember so many times when a person would wake up and say, you know, I have this horrendous toothache and or whatever, and I'm out of my mind, and you're thinking, yeah, right, you know, sure, you know, and I just need a trip to the ER, you know, to get something. And you're like, sure, you know, but it's, you know, and now we have this other side of things, and we are hearing this from the other side, and we're going, wow, talk about all the judgment and the stigma and the way we've approached addiction and the way we've moralized and we've, you know, treated people. It's really kind of horrifying. You know, if you see the approach that's been taken in therapeutic communities over the decades, you know, it's really, I don't know how to even put it. I'll get on a political soapbox and that won't be good, but, you know, back in the 1980s, we had a war on drugs, and it was people of color who were caught up in the crack cocaine addiction in inner cities. And our answer to that was, let's arrest everybody, let's build a whole lot of jails, and let's, you know, mass incarcerate people. Now we have a whole different problem, and we're now taking a kinder, gentler approach, and we're looking at all of this and saying, boy, oh boy, we have really created a big mess. So that's the soapbox. Anyway, the other part of this that's really a problem is that there's a lot of other factors that could predispose, you know, people to pain and to addiction. So we have to look at, you know, and there's a lot of similarities, and that's really interesting and kind of complicated and curious to me. So when Beth was talking about her recovery process, we do the same kinds of things in recovery from addiction. You know, we talk to people about distraction. You know, we talk about surfing the urges, you know, that they're going to go away. You don't have to give in to them as soon as you get a craving. You can distract yourself. We actually have knitting classes at Liberté for the women. We have crocheting. You should see the things people make. It's incredible. By the time they leave treatment in 6 months, they've made amazing blankets and things. And these are all the types of things that we do as adjuncts. We have a yoga therapist. We have mindfulness classes. So all the things that you use to treat chronic pain are a lot of the same things we're doing to treat addiction. So there's a lot about the brain chemistry that we can learn, and I think that this is a great opportunity if we are open-minded to learning these things. So the other thing that is important for me as a treatment provider is that there's a significant proportion of people who are treated with opiates people who've been treated with opiates for chronic pain who've experienced adverse consequences, obviously, and that this has included becoming addicted to opiates and having things like endocrine dysfunction, that's a whole other story for the medical world, and things like hyperalgesia. So when I say that that brings into question the whole idea of an addictive personality, what I mean by that is maybe, just maybe, there's no such thing. Maybe what we really have are just basically good people who've become addicted to some really, really bad drugs. And maybe what we have is a really, really bad disease that we don't know a whole lot about yet, which is really kind of scary because, again, we have a crisis on our hands where we've had so many people die of drug overdoses and we're still not in any way, shape, or form getting a handle on that. So the bottom line, and what I would leave everyone with, is that opioid treatment is appropriate. It's effective for some people who have chronic pain, and when I say some, I mean some. It's definitely a judgment call, and it's never mandatory. It's not a definite, you know, it's not like if your doctor says, here, take this, you can question that. Don't take that on face value. There's a lot of alternatives to that. It's not proven that it has benefit. So that's, you know, the bottom line. And when it comes to being addicted, in my world, the problem is that addicts need to be treated for both pain and for addiction if they become addicted to opiates for chronic pain. Because if they're not treated for the chronic pain, they're going to relapse if they're just treated for the addiction. Thank you.
Can we open it up to a couple of brief questions? We have time for a couple of brief questions. Feel free to ask both Beth or Nancy your question. Secretary.
Oh, sorry.
I just remember, Beth, when you first came a couple of years ago, it was so helpful because you told us all what everything you just said. You said I might have to sit a certain way in the pews, and you made it so that we weren't worried and wondering and what's going on. And you said sometimes I can come, sometimes I can't. So you really educated all of us. That is super helpful.
Thank you. I am a bit of an open book, and I'm not sure everybody would be quite as open as I am, but I do think, you know, I have this, simplistic, but I have this for a reason. And what I've sort of put together is my reason is to give back. And so if I can help one other person, either in a support group or through a conversation or by giving a talk, or I can advertise myself, writing an article published in Practical Pain Management, you know, I'm happy to do that. So, thank you.
I work in the addictions field. I work for rehab, so I see people every day that come in. And I guess, you know, OxyContin was marketed by the pharmaceutical companies as not being addictive. So, you know, you look at that, and it's absolutely completely false. But I guess what I'm asking, what solution do you see in terms of the pharmaceutical companies now? Can they help for what they've created? And also, that could you speak about, like you fentanyl and you carfentanil? I mean, you have drugs that will kill you. You have to think about, this is a drug that you can take and be addicted immediately. And when you don't have insurance for OxyContin, now you're going to heroin, to the street, because that's the only place that you can go to get your fix. That's what you're buying.
Right. So, yeah, the interesting point about the OxyContin and the pharmaceutical companies and the point about it not being addictive. So the pharmaceutical companies really pushed physicians to take on pain as another condition. You know, we all have pain. And I want to also say this kind of idea of we're all supposed to be happy all the time, and FOMO is a new condition, as I've heard from my 22-year-old, fear of missing out. You know, we all have to be on Facebook, and we're all, you know, super happy and having a wonderful life. I'm going to go off on a tangent. So that's not, you know, the case. I mean, we don't all feel great all the time, and we have aches and pains, and we can manage accordingly without a lot of medications. Also, if you go in the hospital today, and for anything, if you've had a minor surgery, you're not going to leave until you've rated your pain management. And the hospitals get rated on how they've helped you handle your pain. Did they come into your room fast enough? And did you get your morphine drip fast enough and all of that? So this has become the new condition that has to be managed. So I think of it the same way I think of pediatricians with antibiotics. And if you think back, you know, antibiotics are not effective with a virus, a viral condition. But parents today, and I'm a new grandparent, so I know my daughter-in-law and my son take my 6-month-old grandson, who's adorable, and I don't blame them, off to the doctor the minute he sneezes. And, you know, every child has to be put on an antibiotic. Well, it doesn't do any good, and it's harmful. But if that doctor isn't doing that, you're probably going to just go, what a quack, and take your kid to the next doctor, the next pediatrician. And that's what the medical field has become for pain and medications. You go to a dentist. I have a close friend who's a dentist, and I've asked him, don't you dare, you know, prescribe Vicodin and Percocets, you know, after you've pulled a tooth. But a teenager today can go get a wisdom tooth removed and come out with a 30-day supply of OxyContin. And this is how a lot of kids, you know, have become addicted and become, you know, overdose victims. So these are scary, scary scenarios. And the fentanyl issue is just beyond scary, because you're right, it is so potent, and it's available via, you know, mail order. It's available on the internet, and it's manufactured in China, and it's being sent here, and it is being mixed with heroin, and it's the new wave.
Given our proximity to Philadelphia, and the city administrations seems to be sort of holding forth safe injection sites.
Yeah.
I wondered what's your professional opinion of that?
I'm all about harm reduction, I have to say. I am, you know, as I said when I introduced myself, I'm the mother of an addict, and he lived on the streets in Kensington for a long time. Twice he went through that cycle, and then he was arrested. And it's, again, by the grace of God, I have to say, the same police officer who kept picking him up and putting him in jail picked him up again one day and said, what's the chances you're holding drugs? And it's just a miracle to me that he's alive, and he was, you know, using fentanyl. And my 6'4" son, who weighs 170 pounds, when I saw him, was 130 pounds. He was eating out of trash cans. So if my son could go to a safe injection site and somebody could intervene, it's a horror story. I shudder to think that that would be his life, but when I couldn't sleep at night for the past 2 years, you know, and prayed to God on my knees every day that he was hopefully alive, I don't know. I mean, it's harm reduction. It's horrible, but we treat, I hate to say it, but we treat cats and dogs better than we treat addicts. You could probably get better care for your dog than I could find for my son.
One more brief question. Jim had his hand up, and then I think we need to close. This has been so helpful. By the way, we have sign-ups on the sides here for our One Hope discussion on March 21st. If you could please sign up if you'd like to attend. Let me know. Jim, final question.
A couple of points. Number one, you're aware of the genetic marker for heroin addiction that is, if you get your 23andMe thing, you can find out if you're likely to be able to quit heroin when you start. So there is a marker for that. You can find out why your brother is more likely than not centers make money,
They
not
do.
off of fixing the person, but off of
The
bringing them
recycle.
through.
Yeah, the commercial insurance carriers,
And
right.
so what we have is, we have a medication that you can put under your arm and you can't get high even from fentanyl.
Yes.
It's called Vivitrol.
Vivitrol, I know, my son's on Vivitrol.
So you can put that in
Yeah.
a person and then they can never get
Never
high
get
even
high.
off of fentanyl. They can't even overdose off of fentanyl.
Exactly,
Yet these rehab centers are not prescribing it.
correct.
And so the real problem here is that the rehab centers are driving, they don't want to solve the problem.
I didn't even get on that soapbox, but you are absolutely right. You are absolutely 1,000% correct.
And that's why.
There's money to be made in this business.
That's right. And so when Tom Price was here at the Mainline Center, they don't prescribe the medical assisted therapy. Now, there are the Leonard Davis Institute, the working school, has said you have to have medically assisted therapy. Yet all the people who have the senators and congressmen here are psychologists.
Right.
Who cannot prescribe medications who want just cognitive therapy, which does not work. If you put that medication underneath the skin, the guy can't get high.
You got it.
You're done.
You got it. We're one of only 13% of the programs in Pennsylvania that do medication-assisted treatment. It's a crime.
And so
It should be criminal.
So the problem is with the rehab centers that aren't doing the right thing. We need to discuss this with the rehab centers and make sure that they put these medications into the patients to stop them from even being able to get high. Our district attorney is prosecuting Bill Cosby. He's not a danger. They won't arrest the people who are on Kensington and Allegheny who are
You got
distributing
it.
drugs.
You got it.
Won't arrest them, but he'll spend $10 million to prosecute Bill Cosby.
You got it. I couldn't agree more.
Wonderful last statement.